Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, you have news on a certain franchise that just seems to be multiplying.
A little bit, yeah. It comes by way of Dusk Golem, aka the Aesthetic Gamer, who you might know as a regular, reliable Resident Evil leaker. And they've been on Twitter responding to some people asking them questions because someone was essentially saying that having 3 Resident Evil games in development at the moment is overkill. And they essentially shot back saying, quote, "Wait until you find out that there was a period of time that Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 8, Outrage, Resident Evil 4 Remake, and Resident Evil 9 were all in development at the exact same time, that being late 2018.
Great
They went on
stuff.
to say that Resident Evil 9 is still in development, but that will still be a ways off yet, coming, they said, no earlier than 2024. So essentially, there's a lot of Resident Evil games coming, Scott, that haven't come out since that 2018 push where everything was in release and in development, I mean.
The thing with Capcom and Resident Evil is I feel like it's not like they ever really took their foot fully off the gas, but I feel like they had a few more, like the time in between the numbered installments was a lot bigger, and it's like, you know, when we got Resident Evil 3, the remake was the tipping point for me, where I was like, oh, you guys took the easy route and you put it out and it's going to sell off the Resident Evil name alone. And we had Umbrella Corps as well, which I know obviously ditched the RE name, but it was still another Resident Evil game in that universe. And I'm kind of just like, oh, are you guys giving in to, like, let's just milk the living hell out of this franchise because it's Resident Evil, and you know, RE7 was one of their biggest selling games in quite some time. Like that was like the one that beat RE6. Like the RE6 was like the highest selling one for a while. RE7 managed to overtake it. And I kind of wonder, just the last few years that we've had with so many top tier publishers just going like, we can milk the living hell out of this if this is like Capcom, like, because I'm having all the thoughts because I remember when Capcom's, I think it was their CEO after DMC5 released, and he had that little viral video that said Capcom is back. And he was just like, you know, we've been away for so long, Capcom is back. And I'm just like, yeah, like you are back, but you also have these franchises that you can just abuse if you want to. And I wonder if they immediately greenlit all these projects and just try to do as many, like let's have an annual Resident Evil, let's have as much stuff as possible.
Yeah, it does feel like they're trying to have this like annual Resident Evil release, and they've had that for like the past few years now. But I do think, you know, like you said, Capcom had that big resurgence when they dropped like Resident Evil 7, they dropped Resident Evil 2 Remake, they dropped Devil May Cry 5. It felt like Monster Hunter, it felt like a big statement of intent of, look, the Capcom of the early 2010s or whatever, like they're gone. We're not doing that stuff anymore. We're properly doing these franchises justice. But then that also meant that these franchises became as much of a success as they've ever been, and we've seen so many Resident Evil games put into development since then, and while a lot of them have been good and have continued the trend that Resident Evil 7 started in particular, we've had a few dodgy ones. You know, we've had a lot of multiplayer efforts that haven't exactly hit. We had Resident Evil 3, which a lot of people liked, but I think we could all kind of agree that was a little bit undercooked, and it could have done with maybe another year in development to add a bit of content to it. And the thing about Resident Evil 9 is that, according to Dusk Golem anyway, if we go back to their previous Old Duskers, their previous leaks on the Resident Evil franchise, you know, we've covered them before. And back in 2020, they were essentially saying that what we know as Resident Evil 8 Village today wasn't always a Resident Evil 8 game. It was in fact originally just going to be a spin-off that people really loved and then became a numbered title after the original Resident Evil 8 was internally rebooted. So I wonder whether or not what was supposed to be Resident Evil 8 has now become Resident Evil 9. It's a confusing timeline to keep track of, but it's not entirely out of character for Capcom because they've always internally rebooted Resident Evil games. And I mean, you know, you look at how many times Resident Evil 4 was internally rebooted, you look at the fact that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, like that was originally supposed to be a spin-off and then it became a numbered title, presumably like Resident Evil 8 Village has become now. So it's fascinating how kind of history repeats itself in that way.
Well, my thought with all this stuff is that they did a big old experiment with Resident Evil 7. Let's switch it to first person. And I know the hardcore fans, like Mr. Ben Roy, will be like, well, if you go all the way back to that Sweet Home tech demo thing for the way back before it was called Resident Evil, that was in first person, I know. But they, you know, tried to go first person, and obviously it took off, like Resident Evil 7, massive success. But when they then did the RE2 remake, for me at least, I feel like the general sentiment was, okay, this is Resident Evil, and this feels great. And this puzzle, like you're going through this scenario, it's third-person shooting, it's RE4 style, this puzzle-based progression. This is Resident Evil. Not that RE7 didn't have puzzles, but I just feel like RE2 was just a tighter package of action and puzzling and things like that. And so for me, if I'm Capcom, then both of these avenues are just as successful as each other. So you kind of want to mine both of them. And I kind of wonder if that was how, maybe originally RE8 started out as a third-person thing or something that isn't the Village that we have now. And they're sort of, now that they've made that first person, RE4's remake is going to have the third person flag, and they sort of just get to go forward doing both at the same time. Because why would they pick from one or the other when they've proven that both are profitable?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, we have Resident Evil 4 in development, which has also recently been rebooted and the developers have been taken off it. We've had a switch up there. But yeah, I feel like those remakes are kind of flying the flag, like you said, for that third-person classic style or whatever of Resident Evil, while this next numbered game can kind of, dabble in this new era that Resident Evil 7 has kicked off. But I think there's a lot of details about Resident Evil 8 Village that kind of do point towards it originally being a spin-off. I mean, it's almost unheard of in the series to go from one numbered title to the next and keep the main protagonist the same. In the first game we switch from Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine to Claire and Leon, and then continue to switch. Obviously, Resident Evil 8 is dabbling in like this weird occult thing with vampires and werewolves. It is a big departure, so you can kind of see why it might have started as more of a spin-off, because they had like cold feet and then they realized, oh no, this is really good and it deserves to be known as like the next big thing in this franchise, which I find really fascinating.
I tell you what's weird as well. If they were all of this stuff was in development in 2018. I mean, obviously, in development can be we have a sketch over there on a whiteboard, and we're getting there, and that's going to be in development. But do you think they had a master plan for what the next few numbered installments were going to be? And now they're almost sort of like improvising based on it's not like on the fly improvisation, but that idea of seeing what's sold and then changing the games around. Like you said, soft rebooting RE4, soft rebooting RE8. Like, do you think that whatever their plan? What do you think their plan was for RE9 back in 2018? Is that something that has just been changed so much now because the first-person stuff has taken off so much?
I guess so. I mean, some of like the original leaks, again, I think Dusk Golem was a part of them. Like, we're talking about it being on like an island and it was like a secret lab and stuff like that, which kind of would have been interesting. But I think that Capcom, rightly so, is becoming more of a reactive company. Like, it's well and good to have plans, but if we were following Capcom's plans in the early 2010s, we would have gotten like 5 Resident Evil 6s. So, you need an element of planning in advance. That's always good, so you don't have this chaotic development where you don't know what's going on. You're kind of putting the train tracks down as the train is coming over the bridge or whatever. But at the same time, you also need to respond to what fans are responding to, what's going down well. Resident Evil 2 is going down really well. Get Resident Evil 3 out. People love this stuff. Resident Evil 7 is now the highest selling game in the franchise. We should probably make a proper sequel to that, you know what I mean? So I always think there's this kind of friction between the plans that are in place, but also, the necessary reactions needed to change with the market and change what the fans are wanting.
I tell you what though, is there such a thing as too much Resident Evil in 1 year? Because I remember Assassin's Creed trying this, and then we had Assassin's Creed Unity and Rogue in the same year, and we all went, can you stop with the Assassin's Creed for 1 year? Do you think they'll get to that point?
That's the big question, isn't it? That's what I'm not entirely sure. If like the quality remains high, then I don't think that's going to happen. But if it starts to get to the point where you can tell that things are half-baked, or things are being pushed out, or things aren't as polished as they should be, then I think we will get to that point of oversaturation where it's like, did we really need Resident Evil Reverse? Could development have been, put on another part of this franchise to bolster that instead? You don't want to go too much too soon, but Capcom, this is one of their biggest ever franchises that's still going, you know what I mean? They're making so much money off this brand, and I do at least appreciate that they're not just churning out Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil 9, Resident Evil 10, you know what I mean? Like, even according to this rumor, there's going to be a big gap between 8 and 9, and we are getting different like flavors of Resident Evil as the years goes on. Like you said, we're getting the first person ones, we're getting the remakes, we're getting Revelations 3 or whatever that is, you know what I mean? We're getting all of these different types, which I think hopefully will stave off a bit of the fatigue.
It seems nice and promising. The thing is that you said, we can tell that something hasn't been sort of cooked as much as it could be. With RE3, I could tell. I could really tell. That was like £50 for that was ridiculous, and I hope that that's not the route that they go down. I think they've learned from that, just considering the amount of sort of different conversations around it. And I mean, even though it scored relatively well, but I feel the general feedback around the RE3 remake was just like, this is not RE2 or even anywhere close to it.
the feedback was loud enough that Capcom has internally rebooted it and changed developers, you know what I mean? So obviously they are not worried, but obviously they don't want to sour this bad thing in the way that they soured, Resident Evil when it came to Resi 5 and Resi 6, you know what I mean? It feels like they very much don't want to repeat those mistakes again and like I said, reactive to what the response is to these individual titles.
Yeah, man, I would hope, I just hope that they treat it with like care, love and respect. And I still want some sort of overarching, dumb, over-the-top plot line to run through all those numbered games going forward. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below. From Resident Evil 9, what would you like to see from that game? And do you want them to be third person or first person going forward? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.